So how did you first learn about Goldsbridge?
I first knew about it when I was 3 years old, and my parents bought an acre of land there and started to build a house. And that was when I was 3 years old. And then I spent the rest of my life going mostly summers growing up there. And then after I was married, I married the boy across the road, a neighbor whose parents also had a house.
Mm-hmm.
And we I had my 3 children, 3 sons, and we spent our summers, and they spent their summers there growing up.
How did your parents get the idea of buying land there?
Well, that was when it was, my parents were the, among the second year of the colony starting. The land was bought by somebody that my father knew with the object of having a summer community for people who they knew. And it was a tract of land that was bought from a farmer, I don't know, 100 and something acres or more, 150 acres, something like that. And they started to sell off 1 acre at a time. And each owner member had an acre of land. And did whatever they wanted with it. So at first, my parents put up with this little bungalow. In my husband's case, they came the following year, and they didn't. This was the Depression time, really, and they didn't have the money to do very much with it. They barely put up a floor and used a tent for several summers.
And Shore's family was the year before. Were they the first year, or
no? Shura's. The story with Shura is that Shura's uncle was the first, and then he was a dentist also, and he was also a friend of my father's. They all came in sort of together. My father came, so Shura's uncle was really Milstein was the name. Was really he and another man were the founders, the original ones.
And where were you living during the year at that point?
Pardon me? Say that again?
When were you living during the rest of the year at that point?
During the rest of the year, we lived in the Bronx, in the southeast Bronx. My husband lived in Brooklyn, in Brownsville, Brook Avenue.
Okay. Do you have first memories of Goldsbridge?
Oh, many, many, of course.
So what's your very first memory?
My very first, let me think. I can't think of one very first, but I can think of very, very early ones because my mother being what she was, the house became a meeting place for relatives and members of the family. And on weekends, there would be many, many people. And so there was a social aspect and a lot of food and a lot of talk and song, which was nice too. Well, and then I had one of my very earliest memories was falling asleep to the sounds of frogs croaking and waking up to the sound of birds, both of which sounds we don't hear anymore.
Because of development or
yes, development, environmental things, yes.
So who else were your first friends there that you remember?
Well, 1 year after the next, that was the very beginning, the place filled up more and more people came in, so there were a lot of children. My friends were all the kids who were around. And as we grew up, we had a very large teenage group. We had a large teenage group, yes.
And were there organized activities for the kids and the teenagers?
Yes, starting quite early, when there were enough kids, they organized a program. They didn't call it day camp, but that's really what it was. And there's just a few of the older teenage girls took over being the counselors and running some kind of program. So there was very small, maybe 15 or 20 kids. but it grew from there. And
was
then it became, over the years, it became more formalized, of course.
When was the barn part of the original farm, or was that built later?
The barn was part of the original farm. When I was a kid, we went to the barn. It has been rebuilt many times over again. But when I was a kid, I remember there still being hay. It had been a working barn for a farm.
Were there other signs of the former farm that were still around?
Only not directly, but I remember walking in the woods and finding an old cow skull. I know, and farm tools were sometimes found.
And how did you travel up from the city?
Oh, it was difficulty at the beginning because we didn't have a car. We take the subway to the railroad, and then the train to Goldman's Bridge, and then the walk from the train. However, when we went up, it was always with lots and lots of packages and heavy loads to carry. So it was quite a job.
So you carried everything by hand?
Oh, sure.
And when you were a child, where was shopping, and how did that happen?
There was a small A&P in the village, what we called the village. The Goldman Bridge had a little one-street village. It had an A&P and a couple of saloons. There was a post office and a butcher shop or something like that. Maybe there were 6 or 7 stores. That's all. And that was the village. A drugstore. There was a drugstore.
So when you say the village, you mean, is that down where the train station is now?
Yes, but the village is no longer there. It had been a little village. It had been a little shopping street and a post office and a drugstore. And it was possible to get there. We would walk into the drugstore in the evenings when I was a teenager to get the ice cream sodas, that kind of thing. And there was but of course, at the beginning of the Golden Bridge years, there was no plumbing and no electricity. So we did use kerosene lamps in the evening, and we had an outhouse.
So did
and the first couple of years, my brothers would carry water from a well down the road someplace. I don't even know where that was.
And when were the roads built?
The roads were originally built by the men members of the colony. It started just a year or two after the formation, after the beginning, and I remember being told to bring water out to the men working on the road. They dug up the ground, and yes. I remember seeing my father and other men were digging up the soil to make a road.
So they were doing that with hand tools.
Oh, yes.
That's a very serious undertaking,
shovels.
Right?
oh yes.
And I know and this includes the roads that are uphill and not.
That was just at the beginning, and then I suppose they did get some paid help to come and do it with power tools of some kind. I don't know. I don't remember that part of it at all.
So was there initially one main road, or
it was originally there was one, yes, and then others were added.
Was your family one of the initial political families, or tell me about the beginning of politics in Golden Bridge?
You want to know about that?
Sure.
Yes, it's starting pretty early. It started pretty early because they got some of the people who came in were very involved in their political thinking, and they were very, very left. They were communists, a lot of communists, yes.
Yeah.
My parents were not. My parents were more socialists.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit of difficulty between them, that as the years went on, there was always a little bit of conflict about
I understand.
that kind of thing. But I do have memories of in my childhood of Saturday night in the barn, starting out with singing the Star Spangled Banner and the International.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you said before singing together, the kids singing together, so were you talking about mostly political songs and folk songs, or what were you singing?
Oh, yes, well, that came later on. No, well, it was very unofficial.
What about earlier?
Had only what they did in camp.
Because my memories about that don't, start in the late 50s. And when people, I spent many years going to Juilliard, and people ask me, so what were your first musical memories? And I say, well, Golden's Bridge, singing civil rights songs.
And singing what?
Singing songs of the civil rights movement.
Oh, yes. Well, that was
songs or the Weaver songs.
Well, you would have done that in the day camp, of course.
Yeah. And that was a pretty major part of the day camp, if I remember.
Oh, yeah.
So which flavor of socialist were your parents?
I don't know if there's a name for it. My parents were, they were very liberal thinkers, and my parents were not typical of everybody in Golden's Bridge. There were others like them, but they were not typical.
Mm-hmm.
They were Yiddishists more than anything else.
That's kind of what I'm trying to get after when it asked which flavor of socialist, whether it was more sort of Yiddishist cultural socialist or
exactly, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what you got. That's pretty much it.
And when you were growing up, were you connected to folk shul or any of those kinds of things?
Growing up, it had nothing to do with Golden, but yes, I went to a working circle shul to learn Yiddish, which I still know pretty well, and to read and write. And I went to middle shul too, which is like a high school for Yiddish.
This was all in the Bronx?
Well, no, I traveled to Manhattan for that afterwards. For middle school.
Downtown.
Yes, 14th Street, yes.
Gotcha. So can you talk a little bit more about the political divide between socialists and Communist Party members when you first remember it? Even in my time, I remember some.
It's not the most important. It's not the most important thing in Golden's Bridge, and it's hardly existing anymore at all. Except as opposed. But there, in the early years, it was more clearly defined because people were allying themselves, to one side or another, more than they did now. So I don't know what else I could tell you about that. It was purely a matter of individual choice in some ways, but the general tone of the place was very left wing. Right.
Did you experience a shift about any of that during McCarthy?
Did we what? During McCarthy?
Yeah, and how do you remember the colony being affected by?
Oh, very much so. Not directly, but we did have one member who was questioned by the committee, and we were very much, of course, in support of whoever was being questioned, and I'm very upset about what was going on in the country, of course.
Sure.
But the general tone of the area. I don't know if you remember anything about the Peekskill event when Paul Robeson sang at the Peekskill concert.
Sure, I do.
Yes. Well, we were Golden's Bridge. The colony was very well represented. I was there. Sam was there. and we were all there, and our buses were throwing rocks at, and that kind of thing. But we were very supportive, yes.
What do you remember about famous visitors coming to either to sing or to speak at Goldman's Bridge over the years?
Not anybody very famous. I think that Pete Seeger may have been there at one time, and I think Sure remembers. I don't remember it. Sure remembers maybe Woody Guthrie having been there, but I don't remember that at all.
My mother tells me the story. I wasn't aware of this when I was a child, but many years ago, she first told me the story of, I think it was maybe 1958, which was our first year there, and she was a American history teacher, subbing in the city, and her friends were saying, well, you've got to go hear this historian who's coming to speak, and she'd never heard the name, and it was at the barn, and she had never heard somebody speak kind of with Communist Party rhetoric and so on. And
what was the name?
So it would turn out it was Herbert Aptheca, and she'd never heard of him.
Oh, Aptheca, yes.
And she had never heard of him, which was odd. But so that was one person that she remembers who came and spoke.
I haven't heard that name in 100 years.
Yeah. Things you remember about raising your kids there?
Well, it was only summers, of course, and it became when my parents sold the house when soon after I was married, and when I started to have children, and we used my husband's house, his parents' house, and they spent their summers there. And at that point, Sam's father was Zadie. He lived in the house, and we spent the summers there. The boys did. Not every single summer, because there were times when they got a little bit older when they went off to sleepaway camp. So it was not. But they all developed a very strong connection with Goldman's Bridge, emotional, and so much so that the house, as you know, is still standing, and now Elliot is living in it, and this is something new, and it had been standing kind of empty for a while.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. I'm glad that he's using it.
I'm curious about. It's just been the last couple of years that you haven't been going back up to Goldman's Bridge. How long has it been since? Yeah. So you've been steadily going this entire time, right?
So that I've been going since what?
This entire time until the last couple of years.
Oh yes. Yes. Well, we. It was not every year and at the same time and that kind of thing, but we always used it. And Sam and I would. Sam has a niece on the other side, who occasionally used it with her children. So we kind of shared it a little bit some summers. And then when my kids got older and went to camps, and there came a time when Sam and I did a lot of traveling in the summer. So that we used it on weekends when we could. It was not a regular thing. So it did change. It wasn't as though we spent every summer there.
So if you think back, what were your absolutely most favorite things about Goldman's Bridge?
What would I most say?
Yeah. What mattered the most to you? I'm
thinking, because it's a difficult
big question. Right?
Yeah. I guess it was a sense of belonging and continuity that I got from it. It wasn't all positive. There were some negatives too. But there was a sense of belonging to a community the sense of community, and 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 continuity, identification, really. It's less political for me than social and developmental, you know.
Mm-hmm. And so if you were to answer the question not about what was most important for you, but what you think was most important about Golden Bridge, just period, like for the world, would you say the same things? If somebody wrote history of Golden Bridge and said what's most important about it?
No, I think probably a very important part of it is that it may be one of the very last few cooperative communities still working as a cooperative.
So so this is a chunk of what I really wanted to talk to you about why you thought it worked as well as it did, and what was important about it as a cooperative. I'm really interested in the cooperative side.
The cooperative side. Well, the fact it was organized cooperatively, and then of course there was a spirit of cooperation for a while, and believe me that there were always conflicts of one kind or another. It never ran smoothly, because thinking political people are always looking for trouble, you know.
part of what gets them into the racket.
Anyway, but there was a cooperative spirit. Everybody felt that a feeling of allegiance to Golden Bridge, to the colony. It had to exist. It had to stay cooperative. And the people who ran things did it on a voluntary basis. You know, it was a sort of a labor of love. And I'll tell you an interesting sideline that happened just very recently. My husband was hospitalized recently. He was quite sick for a few weeks here in Long Island, and he had to have some surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to the operating room, whatever it was. It was minor surgery, but this young doctor came over and said, "I'm Dr. Zackheim. I'm going to be your surgeon. I'm going to do this." And my husband looked at him and he said, "And your grandfather's name was Meyer, and your grandmother's name was Mary." And this young man gasped. It turns out that his grandfather, Sam recognized him from his looks and the name. His grandfather was one of the first presidents of Golden Bridge.
Uh-huh.
He was not all that well liked, but he was an interesting man. He was very, very left of left, and he was a kind of austere person.
Mm-hmm.
But his grandson is a surgeon, and when Sam mentioned it and said, "Yeah, your grandfather spent some summers in Golden Bridge," and he said, "Yes, I did that," and he was flabbergasted. He came back up to the room with Sam. Sam was back in his hospital room. He came up to see us with a whole lot of pictures to show us. I was there, and yes, and the pictures of family, and interesting enough, Sam found on one picture, it was a group picture, and Sam looked at the picture, and he said, "And that's your grandmother, and that your little boy next to him is your father."
Wow.
It was really
That's
quite
amazing.
a scene. It was really quite a scene. Well, anyway, that was so Golden Bridge has come back to haunt us all these years, forever. It never stops. It never stops. And here you are, and here you are again too.
You're right. About the cooperative organization, about it. Did you ever play a role on the board? Did you play? Tell me about your role.
I personally didn't. I'm not an organization person. My husband did for a short time. He was on the board, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also not an organization person. He's very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like the dutiful thing to do. But we were not really involved in the running of the place very much at all. I did work in the camp, and I was the director of the nursery part of the camp for a few summers. Yes, when I was young. So Shura and I worked together in the camp, as a matter of fact.
Oh my.
And interestingly enough, my granddaughter is going to be working in the camp this summer.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah.
When there were points of conflict within the leadership, in what ways did that affect the rest of you who were not in leadership?
In leadership, did you say?
Yeah, for people who weren't on the board, when there was political conflict on the board, how did that affect the rest of you?
I don't know, not very much.
Yeah. So it wasn't like people were all still talking to each other. It wasn't like
there were always conflicts. There were always conflicts. There were always groups and conflicts. That went on forever. Even when I was a kid, even with my parents, and I had a few friends, and they were against a certain other faction. This happened all the time, and I don't think there's any way of avoiding it.
One thing I remember that I think our last couple of years in Goldsbridge, the Matthews had first rented and then bought, I think next door to the Immerman house.
Right.
So, do you remember Thomas Matthews?
Yes, I surely do.
So, what do you remember about him and the family?
Well, the children were friends with, played with my kids. Laura Matthew, the oldest daughter, I think Elliot stayed in touch with her for some years, and she became a physician too, I understand. And so did one of her younger brothers.
Tommy,
yes. I think Tommy became a doctor too. Yes.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit friendly with the parents. Not greatly, but we certainly were on very friendly terms. And they were just good neighbors. That's all. And the kids played together. Yes.
Yeah, because we remember playing with the kids. Also when we were young. My dad was, I don't know how typical my dad was, but he worked in the city, and so he came up just on the weekends.
Yeah, well, most of the men did.
So what was it like during the week when the men were away? Was it different?
Well, when I was a child, we did our things during the week, but when the weekends was approaching, it was all, my father would come up on the train carrying bundles and things, and because that's the way it was done, and we anticipated, we ran down the road to meet him and help him and that kind of thing, and the family was together. But we always looked forward to the weekend when the men would come. That was. But in between, the women. Early on, this is another facet I'm just remembering now. The women got together, and there was a large women's group, and they did some good works, but mostly it was social. And there was the women's club, yes.
So what did some good works? What do you mean?
I'm trying to remember. I remember that they did have to feel some social and political obligation. I don't remember exactly what they did, but I think they felt helped in certain causes. I don't remember exactly what.
One thing remember,
but the women's club was a strong thing. Yes.
One thing I remember, one of the memories that sticks out was at least one and possibly two nights at the barn when there were freedom riders who were taking off at the beginning of their journey.
Well, yes. I think there were a couple of occasions when that happened. When that was in the world, but when that was happening in the world, yes.
And I remember also there being a bus that.
Yes. We did have a few young black teenagers coming. Yes, who were freedom riders. Yes. You reminded me. I had forgotten about that.
Well, I remember some that visited and had a sort of a evening of singing and so on to launch their trips. But I also remember there being a handful of young people who were actually from the colony, who were heading off.
I think there probably were. I don't know exactly who. Oh, I'm sure there were.
I remember also there being a bus that went down to the March on Washington.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
What do you remember about that?
I was not in Golden Bridge at the time. I don't remember where or why, but I know that it happened. Wait a minute.
Okay.
No, I was there. As a matter of fact, now you're bringing back memory. Yes. Those of us who did not go stayed back to take care of the children so the others could go. Mm-hmm. And there was yes, they filled up a couple of buses.
I remember watching it on black and white TV, and I don't remember whether it was in the cottage we were staying or whether that was somewhere else in the colony. Because I know my mother didn't go; she stayed back with the kids.
Yeah, right. But we took those of us who stayed back, and the women. We took care of everybody else's children. That's where they could go.
People were doing sleepovers in each other's.
All kinds of arrangements. Yes.
Yeah. At some point early on, there was also a little area in the woods that was like where people would pitch tents and camp out.
Well, yes. Well, the day camp had an area where they would have campfires and yes, I don't know whether they pitched tents, but they had campfires and they did some cookout kind of things. And then there was an area in the woods behind my parents' old house that Elliot still takes his dog walking up there. I think the camp had used for a while. I don't know whether that was before or after your time. It may have been after your time. Mm-hmm. But they can't use it. They made some kind of clearing up there. I've never been up there, so I don't know.
Do you have
in the woods?
Yeah. Any favorite memories about the lake?
The lake itself?
The lake, the beach.
You do know that before there was a lake, the lake was man-made.
I do know that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, before the lake there was a pond. Mm-hmm. And the pond was right down the road from where you lived, and you passed by now, you would never know there was a pond there. But that was the first swimming hole. It was they dammed up some brooks and they filled up a pond, and that's where we all learned to swim, and it was and we would go swimming in the pond. It was great, and I also have a distinct memory. And then somebody else, there's another family that remembers this very clearly. There was my brother had saved somebody's life in that pond, because my brother was a budding scientist at that time, and he had a microscope, and he was looking through the microscope, not a microscope, a telescope. Mm-hmm. He was looking through a telescope down at the pond, and there was this little kid had fallen off the dam into the water and was floundering. Oh boy. So my brother dropped the telescope and ran down and jumped in and pulled him out. And the kid grew up to be, he's now a grandfather, and over the years, when he's come around, he was a relative of somebody there. Mm-hmm. When his family come around, they want to kiss my feet because my brother saved his life. That's just an aside story, but that was the pond. Story. Yeah. And yes, and then they decided that they were going to needed a lake, so they set aside this. I don't remember how many acres it was, and it was dug. The lake was dug, and they found it was done by engineers and architects. You know, it was very well planned according to whatever streams came in. Mm-hmm. So it's been naturally fed ever since.
So, any favorite things about it?
That's where we. Well, this is you know, we going to the lake was something that you just did every day, and you
sure.
socialized and you swam, you learned to swim, and then they built rafts and they got lifeguards, became much more formalized. Mm-hmm. And at night, some of us would go skinny dipping, you know.
Right, I do know.
and you know, it was one of the central focal points for the colony, really. Mm-hmm. In the summer. Mm-hmm. I did go ice skating in the winter though too.
Oh, How did things change as you remember it when more of the houses started winterizing and it became more of a year-round place?
Well, it changed, and it's changing more and more all the time every year because any new people, whoever's houses are being sold to people who mostly are not interested in the cooperative kind of thing. They want it's a place to live and it's real estate. Mm-hmm. But the colony, the cooperative part of it is still going on. There are such old times, and I understand that some of the young people there are a few of the young owners whom I don't know they need to participate and are interested. So that's hopeful.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I meant to ask you, because we had known, what's his name? He was a piano tuner, and he was a year-round resident, I think starting in the 70s. I'm just blanking on his name, and his son...
Gordon, Elliot Gordon. Paul Gordon. Right? Paul Gordon. Paul Gordon died. He died, yes.
Yeah. Well,
his son is living there, and his son is also a piano tuner.
He had hired me one summer, or maybe it was when I was in college. In fact, it was my first time back in the colony in a number of years. He had hired me during college to help him out, and I was thinking I was going to learn how to tune pianos. I learned how to sweep the floor. I never touched a piano. But
it was good talking to you, Bob, and good luck with this.
Thank you.
Feel free to call if there's anything else you want to know.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay. Take good care.
Okay. Bye-bye.